On a chilly night in March 1990, while most Americans were busy celebrating St. Patrick's Day, the guards at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, one of the most prestigious art museums in the United States, were about to live through a night they'd never forget. Everything seemed normal. The guards were carrying out their routine security checks, watching over the priceless artwork. But just after midnight, two men dressed as police officers knocked on the museum's side door. They claimed they were responding to a disturbance. The guards, unsuspecting, let them in. What they didn't know was that this single decision would seal the fate of some of the museum's most valuable masterpieces, and go down in history as the beginning of the biggest art heist the world has ever seen. Welcome to the story of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum robbery. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. And let's see if we can hit 100 likes before the next video drops. Our story begins in 1903, when Isabella Stewart Gardner decided to turn her Boston residence into an art museum. A place to showcase the unique paintings and artifacts she had spent most of her life collecting during her travels with her husband. Over time, her private collection grew to over 15,000 pieces, making it the largest privately owned art collection of its kind. This legacy transformed her home into one of the most significant art and culture museums in the United States. One of her final wishes before she died in 1924 was that nothing inside the museum should ever be moved or transferred to any other institution, under any circumstance. And from the day she passed until the 1990s, everything inside the museum remained exactly as she left it. On the night of Sunday, March 18, 1990, most of Boston's residents were downtown celebrating the annual St. Patrick's Day parade. The festivities had left the area surrounding the museum unusually quiet, almost deserted, especially late at night. At the time, the museum was equipped with an outdated security system, and its safety relied heavily on the efforts of just a few security guards watching over the rooms. That night, the two guards on duty were Richard Abeth, 23, and his colleague Randy Heston, 27. The museum's security policy had them rotating shifts throughout the night. Randy stayed in the security office monitoring the surveillance cameras, while Richard made rounds with a flashlight, checking the galleries to ensure everything was secure, a routine, dull task they repeated every night. After Richard finished his rounds and confirmed everything was in order, he returned to the security office. Up until that point, the night had been completely uneventful. But at exactly 1 a.m., the calm was broken when a fire alarm unexpectedly went off. Coming from the museum's third floor, Richard immediately left the office and rushed to the location of the fire alarm to check what had happened. He went up to the third floor and inspected all the rooms, but found no signs of fire. No smoke, nothing unusual. So he headed to the control room where the alarm systems were located, hoping to find the source of the problem. But again, there was nothing out of the ordinary. He silenced the alarm and figured it must have been a technical glitch. He made a mental note to report it to the maintenance team the next day. Then he grabbed his flashlight and continued his usual rounds through the museum, before heading back to the security office. This time, it was Richard's turn to stay in the office while Randy took over the patrol. But shortly after, at exactly 1:20 a.m., the museum's front doorbell rang twice. Richard checked the surveillance monitors and saw two police officers standing outside, waiting for someone to let them in. He went to the door to ask what the issue was. The officers told him they had received a report of an alarm going off at the museum, and that nearby residents were concerned something might be wrong. Richard explained that yes, the fire alarm had gone off earlier, but it was just a false alarm, nothing serious. Still, the officers insisted on coming in to check for themselves. After a brief back and forth, Richard eventually gave in and broke museum policy by unlocking the door and letting them in. As soon as the officers stepped inside, they began walking through the building and asked Richard to take them to the security office, the room with the surveillance monitors. Richard led them there and radioed Randy, asking him to join them in the office since the police were now inside. But once inside, one of the two officers started looking at Richard strangely and said, "You look really familiar." The other one nodded and added, "Yeah, I think I recognize you. I'm pretty sure there's a warrant out for your arrest." Richard froze, shocked and visibly nervous. He tried to defend himself, saying he had done nothing wrong, had no criminal record, and had no idea what they were talking about. The officers insisted, asking him to show his ID so they could confirm his identity. Just as he was reaching for his wallet, one of the officers suddenly grabbed him, shoved him against the wall, and handcuffed him, claiming he was under arrest. At that exact moment, Randy walked into the room, only to find his colleague being restrained. Before he could even react or ask what was going on, the second officer tackled him and handcuffed him too. With both guards now restrained, one of the officers looked at them with a mocking smile and said, "Don't worry. We're not here to arrest you. We're here to rob you." After the two officers had tied up the guards, it became clear they weren't police at all. It was all an elaborate setup. They dragged the two men down into the basement beneath the museum, taped over their eyes and mouths with duct tape, and handcuffed their hands to the pipes. Once they were certain the guards were completely immobilized, they searched their pockets and said, "We know who you are. We know where you live. If you want to stay safe, you and your families don't talk to the police. Your reward will come a year from now." Then they left them there and walked out. The two thieves then began moving from room to room in the museum, smashing frames and stealing paintings and priceless works of art. When the alarm sensors kept going off, they destroyed those too. At the time, the museum's alarm system and motion sensors weren't connected directly to the police. All activity was only recorded internally, and it was up to the guards to press a button to alert authorities. But with the guards tied up, the thieves had nothing stopping them. For nearly an hour and a half, they moved freely through the museum, leaving a trail of chaos behind them. Eventually, they entered the security office, took all the tapes that had recorded the break-in, and destroyed the motion sensor data systems and alarm logs. Then they left the museum, got into their car, and vanished, with 13 pieces of art valued at over $500 million. The next morning, at exactly 8:15 a.m., the day shift security guards arrived to begin what they expected to be another normal day. They rang the bell and knocked, waiting for Richard and Randy to open the door and hand over the shift. But minute after minute passed with no response. The morning guards started banging louder, calling out, but still, silence. Worried that something had gone wrong, they contacted the museum's head of security, who immediately called the police. Moments later, officers arrived at the scene and managed to unlock the museum doors. The moment they stepped inside, it was obvious, and from the chaos in every room, that the museum had just been robbed. The first thing police decided to do was search for the night shift guards, the ones who were supposed to be inside the museum during the robbery. That's assuming they weren't involved in the crime themselves. But soon enough, they found both guards in the basement, tied up and in rough shape. They freed them, removed the tape from their faces, and immediately began questioning them about what had happened. The guards revealed that there were only two thieves. One appeared to be in his early 30s, heavyset and around 6 feet tall. The other was thinner, likely in his late 30s, slightly shorter, wore glasses, and stood about 5'7". Both had light skin, brown hair, and mustaches, though the guards weren't sure if the mustaches were real or fake. Once they collected the guards' statements, the police began sweeping the museum, room by room. It didn't take long to notice that the thieves hadn't just stolen anything at random. They had been selective. That raised suspicions that the heist was planned by someone with knowledge of the museum's layout and its most valuable pieces. The fact that only 13 items were stolen, despite the thieves having the entire night, added to that suspicion. Even stranger, none of the stolen works were the most valuable ones in the collection. Some more expensive and easier to carry pieces were left untouched. Among the 11 paintings stolen were two incredibly rare masterpieces, worth a combined $200 million. One was The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, 1633, the only seascape ever painted by Rembrandt. The other was The Concert by Johannes Vermeer, considered the most valuable Vermeer painting in existence. Alongside these, the thieves also took a Napoleonic eagle finial and a Chinese bronze beaker, items with far less monetary value than others they could have taken. Because of the massive value of the stolen works, investigators believe the art had likely been smuggled out of the state, if not out of the country entirely. That's when the FBI officially joined the case. Once they arrived at the scene, agents conducted a full sweep of the museum, hoping to find any clue that might point to the culprits. But nothing turned up. No footprints, no fingerprints, no hair, no physical evidence at all. And with the security footage stolen and the equipment destroyed, investigators were left with nothing but the guards' testimony to work with. Their only option was to release composite sketches based on the guards' descriptions and offer a reward in hopes that someone would recognize the suspects. But with such limited information, no clear leads emerged, and the investigation quickly turned speculative. The first person to fall under suspicion was the museum's own guard, Richard Abeth. Richard was known to have a history of alcohol use, and it wasn't unusual for him to show up to work drunk or completely out of it. The strange part is, on the night of the robbery, Richard showed up to work unusually alert and focused, completely out of character for him, especially considering it was a holiday, and like most Americans, you'd expect him to be drunk or at least distracted. But not that night. He was sharp. Still, whenever they asked him for details about the thieves, his answers were always, "I don't know, I can't remember, I'm not sure." Almost every time it was Randy doing the talking, while Richard would just nod in agreement or vaguely confirm what Randy said, never offering any details himself. When the composite sketches were shown to him, he couldn't even confirm if they looked like the suspects. What made things even more suspicious was something caught on surveillance before the thieves arrived. Just minutes earlier, Richard had walked past the museum's side entrance, the same door the officers would later knock on, and opened it for a few seconds before closing it again. Even more suspicious, Richard was the one who let them inside, despite strict museum policy that prohibited opening the door for anyone, especially during the night shift. All of these details led to a theory. Richard might have been involved. That brief moment of opening the side door could have been a signal to the thieves that everything was in place. Some even believed he tampered with the alarm system himself to allow the plan to unfold. After all, he'd worked there longer than Randy, knew the museum well, and the way the thieves moved through the building, especially heading directly to the basement, suggested they had inside information. The basement's location wasn't even supposed to be known to outsiders, yet the robbers led the guards straight to it as if they'd been there before. Still, despite all the suspicion, there was no concrete evidence tying Richard to the crime. When asked why he opened the side door, he claimed he heard a strange noise in the garden and wanted to check it out. When questioned about letting the officers in, he said he wasn't aware of the museum's policy and didn't think twice about opening the door for police. With nothing solid against Richard, investigators moved on and began forming other theories about who might be behind the heist. After thorough analysis, they narrowed it down to 3 possibilities. 1. The thieves were working for a mastermind, someone like a gang leader or an obsessive private collector who wanted to hoard the stolen art. 2. They were in contact with international art traffickers and sold the pieces through the black market shortly after the robbery. 3. The works were stolen with the intention of demanding a ransom, possibly from the museum or its insurance company. But that last theory quickly fell apart. Investigators learned that the museum had no insurance on the stolen artworks. Given the astronomical values of the pieces, the cost of insuring them would have been overwhelming. So that ruled out the ransom angle entirely. With no other leads, the museum publicly offered a $1 million reward for any information that could help recover the stolen artworks. As soon as the reward was announced, calls flooded police hotlines. Everyone wanted a chance at the money. One tip in particular stood out. A caller claimed he knew 2 men with ties to major crime syndicates in Boston, and their appearances closely matched the composite sketches. He also mentioned they had disappeared the day of the robbery and hadn't been seen since. Investigators jumped on the lead. They got the names and started the search. A few days later, they found one of the men, bound in the trunk of a car, a plastic bag over his head, and stabbed in the chest. No one could identify who killed him. Just days after that, the second man turned up dead as well, this time from an apparent heart attack in a hospital. That's when suspicions shifted again. Maybe these 2 really were involved in the heist, but working for someone else, someone powerful, someone who killed them after the job was done, either to silence them or to avoid paying them their cut. But once again, there were no hard facts, just theories, and with no concrete proof, investigators had to scrap the entire lead and start from scratch, all over again. 7 full years had passed since the heist, and there were still no answers. Neither the identities of the thieves nor the whereabouts of the stolen artwork. In response, the museum raised the reward to $5 million. The case had become widely known, drawing massive public attention and giving journalists a perfect story to cover. Among those who seized the opportunity was Tom Mashberg, a reporter who became deeply obsessed with the case, convinced he could be the one to solve it. As Tom dove deeper into his investigation, he came across the name Miles Connor, a notorious art thief whose crimes were strikingly similar to how the Gardner Museum had been robbed. Most of Connor's heists had also taken place in Boston. But when Tom looked into it, he found that Connor had actually been in prison at the time of the robbery. And he still was. That led Tom to a new theory. Maybe Connor hadn't committed the theft himself, but had followers on the outside who pulled it off for him. So Tom started digging into Connor's circle and eventually zeroed in on a man named William, an art dealer in Boston with a long criminal record involving theft, smuggling, forgery, arms trafficking, and more. William had over 11 known aliases and was already under surveillance by law enforcement. After some time, police began to suspect that William Youngworth, the same man Tom had been looking into, might be storing artworks that Connor had stolen before going to prison. That sparked a new wave of hope in Tom, who believed that this lead could be the beginning of finally cracking the case. Even though there was no concrete evidence linking either Connor or Youngworth to the Gardner heist, Tom kept publishing articles that detailed their criminal history and the connection between the two men. He began pushing the narrative that they were absolutely involved in the robbery. This infuriated William, especially since he was already under police watch and facing other legal issues. One day, William called Tom directly, furious, demanding that he stop writing about him. But Tom refused to back down. He kept writing and even tried to frame William for the crime in any way he could. On August 18, 1997, Tom received a phone call from an unknown person who told him he was calling on behalf of someone Tom knew. The caller asked to meet Tom somewhere after work to show him something important. Tom understood that the caller was associated with William and agreed to meet. He went to the agreed location where a man in a car picked him up and drove him for about an hour to an abandoned building in Brooklyn. Inside the car, the man told Tom to get out. They were going inside. Despite the suspicious nature of the situation, Tom was extremely curious to see where this would lead. So he followed the man into the building, and they climbed long stairs together until they reached a room filled with strange items, mostly antiques. But due to the darkness, Tom couldn't clearly identify them. He kept walking until they reached a table in the center of the room. There, the man pulled out a painting, laid it on the table, and lit it with a flashlight, only for Tom to be shocked to see it was The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, the same painting that had been stolen from the Gardner Museum 7 years earlier. Less than a minute later, the man wrapped the painting back up, took it away, and drove Tom back to where he had picked him up. Before letting Tom out, the man warned him not to speak about what he had seen for 3 days. Strangely, Tom agreed. Exactly 3 days later, the FBI received a tip from William saying he could lead them to the stolen Gardner Museum paintings. But under certain conditions, he wanted full immunity from all charges against him. He wanted Connor to also be released from prison and granted immunity. He wanted the $5 million reward that had been promised to anyone who could return the stolen artwork. To prove he had the paintings, William told the authorities to contact journalist Tom Mashberg, who could confirm whether the artwork was authentic or not. The FBI reached out to Tom, interrogated him, and brought in experts to examine the details of the painting he had seen. Based on his description, they confirmed that it was indeed the original painting. However, the authorities felt that accepting the deal would be a disgrace. They rejected the offer, claiming there wasn't enough solid evidence to back Williams' claims. Then, in October 1997, Tom received an envelope containing photographic prints of all the stolen paintings, along with a fragment of paint from one of the pieces. He showed them to experts who confirmed that the artworks were authentic. Despite this, the authorities still refused to meet the conditions. The case was officially recorded as unknown perpetrator, and to this day, no one knows where the original paintings are hidden. As for Connor and William Youngworth, they served their time for unrelated charges, were released from prison, and now live normal lives. Meanwhile, the poor museum that was robbed still displays the empty frames where the stolen paintings once hung, as a memorial to that cursed night. And that's the end of the story. Let me know what you think. If you've got a story you'd like me to tell, write it in the comments. And whichever idea gets the most engagement, I'll turn it into a video, God willing. Now, show some love. Like, comment, subscribe, and share this video with someone you think would enjoy it. See you next time with a story even more thrilling than this one. Peace.